Okay, so let me just start off by actually reading my own work. It's a horrible practice and vanity, but it keeps me from having to improv, so that's what we're gonna do. So this is from Mind Matters News. This is yours truly, YouTubers versus the Mandalorian. So in a previous article, I discussed the success of the science fiction horror film Iron Lung, a movie directed by YouTuber Markiplier. So yeah, we actually did a review of Iron Lung on the show a few weeks ago. So we did a review on it, and this is kind of an update on what my thesis statement for the episode was. So I had expressed hope that this was a sign of a growing change in entertainment, and I suggested that theaters take note of Markiplier's success. It seems they have. Over the last few decades, or over the last few weeks, 3 films, all made by YouTube creators, have outperformed Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu, which some were hoping would at least be a moderate success for Disney after a long list of failures for the Mouse's version of the Star Wars franchise. The Mandalorian series was arguably Star Wars' greatest success since acquiring the franchise from George Lucas, but at the time of this writing, the movie has made approximately $294 million, which sounds like a lot, but not so much when one considers that it took $165 million to make. And as for the marketing, one estimate puts the cost at $100 million, but it is generally accepted that the marketing costs are the same as production. So, depending on which numbers you're willing to believe, it's arguable that the film has not made its money back. Whether the movie is still in the hole or has managed to make around $30 million, one thing is for sure, the movie has performed below Disney's expectations. It brought $102 million domestically over Memorial Day weekend, which means The Mandalorian and Grogu has the worst opening weekend for a Star Wars film to date. And this suggests, number one, Disney should just give up already and remove the Star Wars trilogy from canon. That's the only way the franchise is ever going to see a profit. Number two, it's highly possible that not only will YouTubers be able to compete with Hollywood, but more specifically, they may be in larger audiences than streaming. They may be able to bring in larger audiences than streaming services. The LA Times states that The Mandalorian and Grogu, I'm just going to paraphrase from here on until we get to the numbers. The LA Times basically stated that Disney was hoping to use The Mandalorian and Grogu as a way to increase their sales for their streaming service, Disney Plus. But the movie sucked so bad that ain't going to happen. And then, of course, what's happened is the three YouTube movies in question were The Backrooms, Obsession, and The Amazing Digital Circus, The Last Act. That's 3 movies in a similar period of time. They all beat Star Wars. They're all independent. And they basically are YouTubers merging with studios. So then the studios that worked with them would be A24, North Road, Focus Features, and then I believe Glitch Productions. And so, basically the studios and the YouTubers started working together. And they've been able to create it's not just that they beat Disney. It's that they seem to have come up with an economic model, i.e. they can use a combination of the studio's distribution methods and something like Fathom Entertainment, which specializes in theater distribution. They can create a variety of different ways to basically get the number of theaters needed to actually make a profit on the film. And they don't have to do as much marketing because the YouTubers, the kids, are actually coming in to see the movies without the commercials. So basically the YouTube channels are acting as the commercials. So with that said, let me get down here to the actual numbers. So The Backrooms took $10 million to make, and at the time of this writing, it's grossed $212 million globally. And this would have been last week. This article came out today, so I studied these numbers about 2 days ago. So these numbers are actually 2 or 3 days old. And see, Obsession took $750,000 to make, and it's made $234 million globally. And The Amazing Digital Circus, The Last Act, it it doesn't actually produce a budget, but this was actually really interesting because it was almost impossible to get numbers for the movie. They estimate that an animated episode of something takes somewhere between $300,000 to $1 million to make for like a 30-minute spot, let's say. So if this movie's about 93 minutes and you assume it takes about $1 million an episode, then you get an estimate of $3 million. And I did see one website do a $3 million estimate, so that was the number I went with. And I believe, like I said, I believe that number is based on how much it actually takes to create an animated independent episode. Of course, you still have to bear in mind that we have no idea how much they paid Fathom Entertainment either. But it can't be that much given the numbers on the board. And The Amazing Digital Circus, The Last Act actually made $26 million, which is obviously the least of the three, but they still beat Mandalorian and Grogu. So, moral of the story is Disney really, really needs to rethink their Star Wars strategy, but also the YouTubers are, they're making an impact, they're making a difference. And they're actually changing, they're not just making it possible for independent films to be popular, but they're changing the economic model. And so that begs the question, should they actually try to copy this? Like, should Christian YouTubers get into this? Should the Christian community actually try to get ahead of what's obviously coming down the pike? Because the thing about Hollywood is they're going to drag their feet and kick and scream and carry on, trying to pretend like the old system is still relevant when it clearly isn't. So, they're going to be behind the curve. And I worry a little bit about Angel, because Angel's been doing some things that have disturbed me. They've obviously had a lot of lawsuits and stuff going on. We've talked about Angel Studios and the whole Animal Farm controversy of late. That was actually quite a big deal. And it wasn't just Angel Studios. It wasn't just Animal Farm. It was the House of David. When we did the reviews of the House of David, now I don't know if that was Angel Studios specifically, but one of the guys who helps with The Chosen was involved in it. And you were seeing a lot of concessions to the whole girl power narrative and the DEI stuff. Like, you could tell that there had been a give and take for the DEI mentality, I guess you would say. And they had to do that to get this thing to run on certain platforms. Deals were made. Compromises to the story were made to basically line up with Amazon's contract. So that's a result of the studio system. That's why the studio system is such a problem, because as long as these guys are like operating in the traditional circles, they're going to have to listen to the people with the government money that are trying to set the narrative. And they're going to, they're going to let the Christians participate a little bit, but they're not going to let the Christians get too powerful. They're not going to let them really play in the reindeer games, as it were. So the question is, if you've got a new economic model actually getting set up for the YouTubers, then maybe Christians should start thinking about actually building channels, building organic audiences that aren't dependent on marketing and can basically appeal to theaters directly, much like the churches did in the early days of this thing. Back during, was it Fireproof? I wasn't a big fan of Fireproof, but I believe the churches really helped get the theater distribution spread across in that regard. You may be looking at something similar, but instead of pushing it through churches, you're going to be pushing it through YouTube channels. That might be something that people need to start thinking about. And maybe Christian studios need to start looking at YouTubers to push, like Ruslan KD or somebody, to start pushing like Christian projects. So it's interesting. But here's the problem, and I'm just kind of like speculating here. I do wonder if YouTube is actually going to keep if YouTube's actually going to let the YouTubers get this powerful. Because I do feel like there's some palms being greased. I do worry that YouTube might manage a decline if it means keeping Hollywood in power and keeping the power somewhat centralized. Because if the creators can tell whatever stories they want, well, it's going to be very hard for these guys to control the narrative. One of the things I mentioned actually was The Amazing Digital Circus, The Last Act. Like, that movie is interesting because if you've seen The Amazing Digital Circus or any episodes of The Amazing Digital Circus, then you know that the content for all the jokes and the crass humor and the, edgy teenager window dressing, the fundamental question in that story is basically human consciousness versus AI. And it is wrestling with the meaning of existence and consciousness. And enough people were interested in the answer to that question. Enough people were interested to the answer to that question to go to the theater and find out the movie's conclusion. I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know where it lands. But enough people wanted to know the answer to that question that they went and made $26 million for these people. And there wasn't a commercial. They didn't need to hear a bunch of commercials to remind them to do it. Which tells me that people are actually possibly interested in intellectual content. Maybe they want to actually have stories that address complicated subjects instead of following the same generic formula, the save the cat. We got to make sure that we have the dark midnight of the soul here, and we got to make sure that this character is an author insert, and we got to make sure that, we systematically hit every trope so the algorithm knows where the story is supposed to go. Like, maybe that's not responding with people. Maybe people are actually interested in technical, complex, deep stories, because for as crass as The Amazing Digital Circus can be, it has the Chinese room in it. Like, it actually has a joke about the Chinese room. Now, this is that what if scenario. The Chinese room is that what if scenario where you have a guy in a room full of Chinese symbols, and then you give a guy a piece of paper that tells you how to translate the Chinese symbols, and then the guy gives the appropriate responses to the Chinese symbols to another guy, who's on the other side of a door. Well, that doesn't mean that the guy who's giving the correct answers understands Chinese. He's just got the guide, So the idea is that just because somebody can create the correct answer to a question or mimic a human behavior, that doesn't mean that the person actually understands. So just because somebody can say that the answer is box, that doesn't mean that the somebody in question knows what a box is. And it's one of those, it's like the Chinese room versus the Turing test. That's a big AI debate. And it actually has that as like a passive joke in the show. And so it's a little more intelligent than people would give it credit for. And people responded to it. So maybe some Christian material with some deeper themes, some more complicated and different subject matter than the traditional dark midnight of the soul or whatever, maybe people would actually respond to that. Maybe you can actually get some complex, deep Christian content out if you take advantage of the system that has already been stress tested 4 different times and has proven to be resoundingly successful. Iron Lung, massive success. I think Obsession is going to be the largest movie, like as far as like return on investment. It's going to be the most successful film in all history. I can't think of anything that gets even close to that kind of a return. I mean, it's absurd. $750,000 to $234 million. Think about that. They spent $750,000 and got $234 million back. That's insane. So the model has been shown to work, and the studios are starting to take the hint, and they're starting to integrate, and they're starting to grab those YouTubers, which is good. That means that they're not going to dig in their heels and try to kill them. I am kind of worried about that YouTube might. I think YouTube's actually might end up being a bigger threat than the I think YouTube might end up being a bigger threat than the studio system, actually. I don't know why, but I feel like YouTube has got this. It really, really, really wants to be Netflix. I don't think Netflix is that great, but YouTube really, really, really wants to be Netflix. So you're going to have to deal with that. But hey, if Rumble ever gets its hind end together, maybe YouTube won't fall apart fast enough, and maybe Rumble will get organized and you can get creators there. But the bottom line is this economic model of building an audience and then relying on that audience to go see the movies, and that's where you make your money. That seems like that's like I said, that's been stress tested multiple times, and it's worked, which is really, really cool. And so I'm hoping that maybe not Angel Studios. I don't know. I feel like Angel Studios might be a little more traditional than we think, and I'm a little worried that they've kind of gotten in bed with the wrong bunch. I'm worried about it. I'm not sure. That animal farm thing got me spooked, and so I don't know if they're going to keep being the good guys. We'll see, but yeah, maybe another studio can come in and find. Maybe Mike Winger's got some good creative ideas. Who knows? So anyway, I just found it. I find what I saw over the weekend to be very encouraging. And the best part was that when I went to the theater, I watched Backrooms and I watched Obsession. And I've never felt like the oldest guy in a room before, but I did there. It has been over a decade since I've seen a theater so full. I saw, there's like 2 or 3 seats left, and everybody actually showed up. Like it was an almost sold out theater. I cannot remember the last time I saw an almost sold out theater. I know it's been north of a decade. I know it has. They'll buy the tickets for the theaters, but that doesn't, or at least I suspect that's what they're doing. But I've seen theaters that look fuller than they actually are. I've seen that before, but I've never actually seen, really since they started like making you pick your seat at these theaters, I've never seen them actually make you pick your seat and then everybody who's picked a seat actually show up. I've never seen that before. But they did for the Backrooms, and because that was like the 8 o'clock show that I went to. And they were all kids, like out of high school, maybe just starting college, kids. And that was encouraging, because that means kids are willing to go to a theater, which they were saying after COVID they just would never do. And I mean, I've never bought that. I don't think COVID actually killed the theater. I think it's the crap media. So kids are still able to go to the theater, or they still want to go to the theater. They'll ask to go to the theater if it's for their person that they're following. YouTubers are replacing celebrities. So Mike Winger might end up more popular than Brad Pitt, who knows? But anyway. So that's really interesting. I think that the Christian community should think about that and see if there's a way to come up with maybe a way to make Bible stories or something like that. And because the theaters will apparently say yes for they're getting more likely to say yes, because again, the idea has been proven. It's no longer hypothetical. We've got 4 movies that have been successes. It proves that the model works. And now that we've got proof that the model works, I think there's good things coming in the future. So that is all I wanted to say about the last week, about Obsessions and Backrooms and The Amazing Digital Circus, the last act. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Faith, Fiction, and Folklore. If you did, we would love it if you would subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Rumble. We can also be found on X, Instagram, and Facebook. And we are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Thank you again very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.